When I got this assignment, I was hoping there'd be more gambling.
Patrolling the Mojave almost makes you wish for a nuclear winter.
Arguably the two most known quotes said by various troopers of the NCR, short for New California Republic, in Fallout New Vegas, the sixth video game entry in the long-running series. Though this faction had been seen and referenced in previous games and media within the franchise, this would mark the first time troopers were portrayed in a formal and proper way, with inspiration for their look being pulled from a few real-world instances, some of which, at the time, even dated back nearly 100 years. Released in 2010, this year, 2025, marks the 15th anniversary of New Vegas, which since its release has seen it become one of the franchise's most popular and praised entries, seeing a large impact resulting in it leaving a mark on video game culture for a plethora of reasons. When it came to the franchise itself, though, it helped to expand the lore by way of storytelling, gameplay, and most prevalently location, setting the bulk of the game in and around the ruins of Las Vegas, Nevada. With the Fallout franchise taking place in a fictional timeline where the world has undergone a nuclear war and subsequent apocalypse because of it, most games involve the main character being a vault dweller, that being someone who found themselves in the seeming safety of one of the many Vault-Tec vaults across the United States who must venture out for varying reasons. New Vegas, however, threw players into the shoes of a courier left for dead in the Mojave Desert, after surviving a bullet to the head only to get caught up in the middle of a power struggle for control of New Vegas and the surrounding region, including the highly sought-after Hoover Dam. Of these factions, the two most significant were Caesar's Legion, a slave-based society which modeled its structure, culture, and military on the Roman Empire, granted somewhat improperly, and the NCR, a mostly democratic state, basing a large portion of its society and government on the former US federal government, which at the same time had aims of expanding its control and territory. As both of these groups held large portions of the southwestern United States, they would eventually see open conflict, with perhaps the most contested being New Vegas and the surrounding Mojave region. Because of this, the NCR fielded a number of military units, and though it wasn't the most technologically advanced when it came to weaponry, it was still one of the strongest due to sheer numbers. Making up a bulk of this force, at least in the Mojave region, were the standard infantry units, simply referred to as NCR troopers. Seeing some variation in their uniforms, they primarily consisted of muted khaki and brown clothing, vests, and accessories, as well as an almost hybrid of a Pith and Brody helmet. Distinct in their looks, they would fill the role of police, security, infantry, and occupational forces. But with that sort of intro and setup regarding these guys, let's now start a breakdown of their uniforms and equipment. Starting at the top was their headwear, which saw a few different items and configurations. We'll start off simple with the face wrap, as it was the most straightforward element. Seen in two versions, a black and white bandana and a dark khaki scarf or wrap, technically they were referred to and labeled as face wraps. The dark khaki version was seemingly a standard issue piece, as it appeared to be worn by all troopers, with the more popular way being around the neck and under the arm. However, on occasion it was seen wrapped around the lower face. The second version, though more frequently seen with members of Caesar's Legion, was a straightforward black bandana with a white paisley design. Seen only in very rare instances, with the most notable being the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, these were actually equipped on characters to save on processing power in-game, and likely were done as an homage to ones worn by cowboys and outlaws in various Western-themed movies and other media. Next is eyewear, of which there was one main and one less common. The standard issue piece for almost all was a pair of goggles, which were either worn over the eyes or over the front top portion of the helmet. These had a thinner and more basic design, seeing two separate lenses held together by a cloth, likely leather frame. Not seeing an exact real-world equivalent, there are a few ways of getting these beyond fabricating them, as some close to accurate models would be the USAN 6530, which was produced for a brief time during World War II for Army and Navy flight crews, but had a tendency of their lenses shattering. These can still be found, but often are on the costlier side. The British RAF Mark 8 flying goggles, which today have quite a few reproductions made in varying colors and material, and most commonly and also somewhat similar to the RAF model, Halcyon brand goggles, of which there are quite a few models, many of which are very close. The second piece, though not as frequently seen while also appearing around the region and worn by various characters, be they NCR or otherwise, were assorted sunglasses that looked to be based around a simple pair of black tinted or mirrored aviators. Getting to hats, there was a few, but really only one standard issue, a beret, though they were seemingly reserved for officers and select elite units, meaning there were actually two versions. The most common, and the one seen worn by officers, was a green one, which seemed to incorporate a muddled and scaled down woodland style camouflage pattern pattern, though it's a bit hard to say for certain. Considering the berets were heavily distressed and dirtied, it's hard to tell if they had a camouflage print from the start or they were done so by the wearers, but judging from the lack of any stitches or texture and almost soft look to them, they were most probably made of wool or a material close to it. This narrows down the options a bit if one wanted to go the already printed camouflage route. An easy workaround is to get a green one and add a bit of a design by way of paint and distress. Interestingly though, one of the easiest to source, which hits every point, is a camouflaged one worn by members of the IDF's Kaffir Brigade, which can be found online. Alternatively, berets and other materials have all sorts of designs which are pretty close, such as a commercially produced German Flecktarn beret. Whatever route is chosen, these had a pin on their front bearing the emblem of the New California Republic, that being a two-headed bear and star. The second version was one reserved for members of the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, which specialized in sharpshooting. These were much simpler in that they were just dirtied red-maroon colored berets bearing a flash patch of the 1st Recon's emblem and motto. The other item worn atop the heads of almost every other trooper was the aptly named trooper helmet, which is arguably the most interesting element of the uniform, as its general shape seems to pull from two influences, leading to many using either one or the other. Due to the shape and composition of it being circular with a wide brim and covered in cloth, some have pointed to Pith or safari-style hats and helmets, while others have looked to the Brodie helmet, specifically the Mark I and IIs and their copies and derivatives, be they British, Canadian, Australian, or American, which too share a similar design. This sort of split in origins is compounded, as in a 2018 email exchange between a fan and Obsidian Entertainment support, senior conceptual artist Brian Menz was quoted as saying, "When I put the outfit together, I used a Pith helmet for the design." Though in the same email, project director and lead designer Joshua Sawyer was quoted, "Cork wouldn't have been available, so they likely would have used metal with a cloth over the top." So that pretty much puts it somewhere between the two, as the general shape does seem to slope downwards on the back portion, leaning it more towards a Pith helmet. However, in the game, if it's dropped, the metallic clang can be heard. Real-world Pith helmets of this design often bear a much larger brim for extra sun protection, and so some have used modified versions of specific types, such as Vietnamese ones made famous during the 1960s and 70s due to the war. But at the end of the day, it's ultimately up to the wearer. Whatever the case, it would need a dark brown band around it and is frequently seen with a pack of the fictional Pyramid-branded cigarettes. Now, a second version of this helmet was worn by military police forces, which saw the color of the helmet's cloth change to a darkish blue-black, with MP spelled out in large white font on its front. Jumping to the opposite end of the body was the footwear, which came in the form of some basic brown leather boots with foot wraps, which likely were puttees based on the design's overall influence. Considering the presence of the puttees, which were just tan-colored cloth wraps, the boots themselves were likely shorter ankle-height ones, and from their overall design, the closest and likely inspiration for them were British World War I era ammunition boots. Often called that or simply ammo boots, these first started to appear around the 1860s and continued use, albeit in different colors and with slight variations, for around 100 years by not only British but also many other Commonwealth nations. Luckily today, a number of companies and outlets offer an assortment of reproductions, so there's quite a few options and versions to choose from. Moving from feet to hands, all troopers wore a set of black leather fingerless gloves, which looked to be the most distressed portion of their entire uniform. Judging from the features and details, or really lack thereof, these seem to be just straightforward black gloves which look to have either been haphazardly stitched together or repaired, seeing various seams and threads connecting them, while also bearing bits of dirty cloth strips wrapped around the knuckles, leading to arm wraps which run from the hands to the end of the wrist or so. To replicate these, a few directions can obviously be followed, with the easiest being to get a set of leather fingerless gloves bearing the least amount of details and features and just distress them quite a bit, with an extra step being to cut them up and stitch them back together. As for the wraps, either cloth strips or another set of puttees can do the trick just fine. Looking at gear and webbing, all troopers wore a basic belt which held a pouch and canteen. The belt was made up of brown leather and featured a silver squared buckle bearing a single prong. Attached to it on the wearer's right side was a simply designed tan rectangular canvas pouch which used a central vertical strap and metal ring to keep it secured, and was likely intended for general storage, but more than likely for holding magazines for the service rifles and other firearms. Opposite it on the wearer's left was a canteen and cover which appeared a little greener in color, looking to be based off of the US M1910 or subsequent subsequent models. Now, the belt, canteen, and its cover can be sourced more or less with relative ease, as the belt is a run-of-the-mill design, while the canteen and cover sees plenty of original and reproductions floating around. However, the pouch, which was original to the game, is a little different. That being said, some kits for these, along with the armor, which we'll get to in just a bit, have been recreated and offered online. But still on the topic of gear, some forces also wore a bandolier across their chest and back, which too appeared to be based off of older US military equipment, in this case the US Browning Automatic Rifle, or BAR cartridge belt. Like the canteens, various versions, be they original or reproduction, are all over the place, but the problem is these are designed to be worn as a belt and only consist of 6 cell pouches, while the in-game version stretches across both the chest and back, seeing 14. It is possible to make a custom one by getting a long enough canvas belt and simply sliding on the necessary cell pouches, but like the other web gear, these two have been recreated more accurately. Next up is their armor, which consisted of a 4-piece vest with the front and back portions being identical, allowing for the covering of the chest and upper back. These would be connected to one another via leather straps on the lower portion, as well as upper, seeing straps feed through 2 wide shoulder pauldrons, allowing for a little extra bit of protection, and padding on the upper arms and shoulders. Interestingly, these pads appear to be technically a part of the fatigues, as characters not wearing the armor in the game still have them on their shoulders, so you can sew them on, but it's probably easier just to wear them with the armor. Anyway though, judging from their color and texture, the armor looks to have been made from a canvas-like cloth on their outside. Much like the belt and pouch, these can also be sourced from makers, with the most well-known being Artel Alexiva, who can be found on Instagram. Offering the standard armor along with the necessary stencils for the NCR emblem seen on the front, as well as all pouches, belts, and bandoliers, he has been the go-to for many over the years when recreating the ensemble. In addition, he also produces a leather version of the armor, other custom real-world gear, be they older or commissioned, and is even playing around with armor pieces for Caesar's Legion. To see all his stuff and the way to order any of these, just follow the link to his Instagram, which can be found in the description. Below all this armor was their 2-piece field uniform, technically called the NCR Trooper Fatigues. Consisting of a longer khaki field tunic and matching khaki breeches, these feature exposed circular buttons, 2 billowed lower pockets, 2 smaller upper sleeve pockets, and either a small inset pocket or unused name tape area on the wearer's upper right chest. Now, upon initial inspection, it looks like this could be a uniform inspired by an older 20th century one fielded by any number of nations. However, it's been confirmed to have been directly related to those of ANZAC, or Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, a military component of the British Empire which was formed during the First World War, as Joshua Sawyer had this to say during a 10th anniversary charity stream in 2020.
Any reason Brian and I chose the World War I outfits? There was like a neat kind of distinctive deserty vibe to the, especially like the Australian, like the Anzac type of uniforms that we saw. They just had like a neat kind of vibe to them. They seemed, their first half of the 20th century vibes, they kind of fit well in the desert. Yeah, we just thought they had the right vibe to them, is kind of the idea.
When referencing the vibe and fit for a desert environment, this makes sense, as Anzac forces during the First World War primarily were stationed, trained, and fought in and around North Africa, the Mediterranean, and Middle East, mainly against the Ottoman Empire, with some of the most famous examples being the Gallipoli campaign in modern-day southern Turkey, but also the Mesopotamian front, now Iraq, as well as the Sinai and Palestine campaign, now Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and Palestine. Being as many locations in those campaigns were arid, dry, and composed of desert terrain, the connection and association is a valid one. So as far as the uniform, where does that leave us? Well, comparing images of NCR troopers to those of Anzac infantry, the one that is closest is that of the Australian Imperial Force, or AIF service dress uniform. Introduced in 1914, these are immediately noticeable when compared to other British and Commonwealth uniforms when it came to the tunic specifically. These more or less took many elements seen in Australian bush jackets and refined them into a more rugged military uniform, seeing larger pockets, a padded spinal area, and button cuffs, all of which weren't really a thing around the rest of the Empire. That being said though, these appear to be the direct inspiration, but they're not exactly the same, and some modifications would have to be done. Most notably the removal of the chest pockets, the addition of the shoulder pockets, and the addition of a rear curved stitch on the back, presumably for a reinforced internal yoke of some sort. As far as the cuffs, shoulder boards, and collar, seeing as in the game these are always covered up by something, nothing really needs to be done with them, though their adjustable waist belts could also be removed, but in-game that portion too is covered by the equipment belt. Regarding the breeches, they more or less appear appear the same. When sourcing these due to their age, originals aren't that easy or cheap to come by, and you'd probably not want to ruin a historic set for these purposes. Luckily, a few outlets and companies have been reproducing them, though on the other hand, it seems others recreating this uniform have taken different approaches, such as modifying or customizing other garments with similar looks but in different fabrics, as the AIF service dress is made up of wool, meaning if you're wearing it in the desert, it will help defend against the rocky and coarse terrain, but will definitely lead to excessive heat and sweating. That brings us to the last element of these uniforms, the occasionally seen accessories, of which there are only a few. The least common, which was worn by military police alongside the helmet band, were narrow black armbands which simply had white MP lettering on them that were worn on both arms above the tunic's shoulder pockets. Next was something of a small single-sided mantle cloth piece which was worn over the wearer's left shoulder. Appearing to be nothing more than a black band with a tattered piece of dirty tannish brown cloth, the exact purpose of them isn't quite known, though they did often, but not exclusively, appear to be worn by officers, meaning they may be related to rank or status among troops. Though worn by every trooper but only encountered when pickpocketing or checking dead bodies, were dog tags, a variant of Fallout's holo tags, which were pretty much more technologically advanced and able to hold more information beyond just embossed text. Because their use in the game is limited, being able to get into the details is too, but judging from their appearance, they seem to be based off standard US military ones, seeing a beaded chain and 2 silence tags. In-game, they serve the same purposes as real-world equivalents, but could also store all sorts of data like security clearances and so on. But as far as physical appearance, to mimic these, your best bet would be to get real ones made and add a small rectangular piece of reflective material to their sides to emulate what looks to be a holographic or digital screen. Lastly, to round out accessories would be currency, of which the most encountered would be bottle caps of all sorts, though the most common ones would be assorted Nuka-Cola types as well as Sunset Sarsaparilla, with the other being NCR currency, of which there were printed $5, $20, and $100 denominations. All of these can easily be sourced as they're made quite extensively and offered online through various sellers, with a big assortment being found on Etsy. That just leaves us with weapons, of which there were a few, but for time's sake we'll be focusing just on the most common and widespread ones, which were the 5.56 service rifle, a mashup of early experimental models of the Armalite AR-10. To get a better idea of it, we can again look at what Joshua Sawyer stated in the charity stream.
Yeah, like we thought about having a weapon that was kind of like an Armalite rifle, but with wooden hardware. There's like an AR-10 maybe I'm thinking of. There's an old AR that had like wood or like some sort of bakelite brownish kind of thing, and that was kind of the vibe. It's just something that felt more like a World War II battle rifle mixed with a more contemporary battle rifle. That was the idea.
Next were sidearms with 2 main ones, the first being the N99 variant of the 10mm pistol. In original design, it's seen more or less in every entry of the series, but when it came to the NCR, appeared to be used mostly with enlisted units, while the M&A 9mm pistol, which was heavily inspired by the real-world Browning High Power, looked to be carried more frequently by officers. Finally, and perhaps the most retro-futuristic looking of them, was the cattle prod. Used by military police forces within New Vegas' Strip due to a strict no firearms policy put in place by Mr. House as a part of his agreement with the NCR, these were repurposed to be used for non-lethal means when dealing mostly with unruly visitors. As far as these go, some have made props of them, but usually from scratch. Now, these obviously weren't the only weapons used, as quite a number of others were seen too, though they wouldn't exactly be considered standard issue, instead often being reserved for specific units, purposes, or locations. With those done though, we've pretty much hit every note for the NCR troopers, at least as far as the rendition seen within the video game. Now, obviously there are other NCR units such as the Rangers, heavy infantry, as well as specific individuals like General Oliver, who wears a unique uniform. On top of that are the garments worn by the NCR remnant as seen in the first season of the 2024 Amazon TV show simply called Fallout, with season 2, which as of this video's publishing is not yet released, looking to base NCR trooper uniforms very closely on those of the game, at least according to supposed set photos. Perhaps in the future we'll take a closer look at some or all of these, not to mention other Fallout related uniforms of other factions, be they from New Vegas or the other entries. But for the time being, hopefully this video was interesting and informative to those who wanted to put together this look or simply were curious about the real-world influences and inspiration for the NCR Troopers uniform. If you enjoyed it, perhaps leave a like and subscribe if you haven't yet done so. If not, no hard feelings, just be sure to check back soon for more uniforms of the screen right here on Uniform History.